Okay, this week we are going to talk about subsistence, or how people get their groceries. It also covers the ways we make a living and cover our basic needs for food and shelter. So when we think about subsistence, it's fundamental to understanding everything else about a culture. In cultural materialist terms, this has become because system is a major part of the infrastructure of any society, no matter what size it is. So it influences or determines much of the rest of society. And in more general anthropological terms, because culture is integrated, subsistence is inextricably linked to everything else we do. As a result, anthropologists can rarely, if ever, discuss subsistence without bringing in other aspects of culture. And studying subsistence leads to broader questions. Why do different societies use such different subsistence strategies? Why have subsistence strategies changed over time? How does using a given subsistence strategy affect other aspects of society? And what are the effects of shifting from one subsistence strategy to another? So what I want to do is, when we talk about this, we talk about the interaction between the environment and subsistence, and this is an important point. Western societies have had a tendency to look at other ways of living and argue they are primitive and can be improved by adding in Western ways. But in many environments, the lower impact, low population density approach is stable and provides all that's needed. And by adding improvements like agriculture and automobiles, those cultures actually become unstable and the environment severely degraded. So there's not actually a single right way of doing things. And agriculture, or the way we live, is not the trajectory towards which all cultures should strive to reach with their subsistence strategy. So basically, what I want to talk to you about today is something of a checklist of patterns we commonly see associated with different types of subsistence. While there is variation and exceptions to these trends, they hold true in many cases. And so for many types of these, what we're looking for are, for each type of subsistence strategy, there's trends in each of these. So how many people live together in a community? So group size. So when we talk about group size, we're looking at how many people live together in a community. We look at mobility. So does the group stay in one place or do they move around? We look at leadership. Who makes the decisions? We can look at trends in material culture. So what are the attitudes about material possessions and how much stuff do people have? And we can also look at division of labor. How does the main work of the household get done? So let's look at each of these. Let's start with food collecting. It's also referred to as foraging or hunter-gatherers. And in foraging or hunter-gatherers, the group size is small. So 15 to 30 individuals on average. These are usually extended families. Sometimes we'll see groups up to about 50, but not usually much bigger than that because their mobility is high. And there are two common patterns of mobility. The first is called home-based foraging. And what this means is there is a semi-sedentary camp that the people live in for part of the year, perhaps during the winter or dry season. And then they take extended, maybe 2 to 3 month trips from the home base to visit parts of the territory where other resources are available, like maybe gathering pinyon nuts in the fall or collecting duck eggs in a marsh during the laying season. But they will have a home base, a semi-sedentary place, someplace that's set up for long periods of time that they will come back to consistently. The second kind of mobility is called seasonal round foraging, and this is where a group moves a defined pattern through their territory, in a defined pattern over the course of a year that will take them into the right place at the right time to take advantage of a resource. Either way, note that foragers know their environment well and aren't just wandering at random to try to find food. Their movement is very patterned. So if you ever hear people say that hunter-gatherers really just sort of wander around looking for food, that's not true. They're not wandering. They have a very particular way of going about getting food, and it's patterned and it's structured, and they know where the resources are. Leadership decision in groups like this tend to be based on a consensus of everyone involved. Leaders are selected from the group according to ability. So if we're going on a big hunt, the best hunter will be our leader this week. But next week, when we're gathering wild plums, we might find the person who knows most about the plum groves. And so the leader will shift and will be based on consensus. Material culture, they have very, very few possessions. And go back to mobility when we start thinking about why they have very few possessions. You don't want to carry a bunch of stuff around when you're moving a lot. So many possessions that they have can be used for multiple uses. So rather than 10 types of a one-use knife, they might use a machete for everything. Their attitude about wealth is that it's actually bad to have a lot of stuff. It creates jealousy and disrupts the peace within a group, and it's also extra stuff to carry around. So that's bad when you move around a lot. And then when we look at division of labor, it's gender-based. Now, in this context, women tend to be the gatherers and men tend to be the hunters. But that's not to say that women can't or men can't do something else. But childcare, work around camp, and so on is loosely structured with everyone participating. But if you keep in mind with women tending to be gatherers, it tends to be slightly safer, it tends to be more close to home, and it's easier to tote around small children, especially when those small children are dependent on the mother to feed them. All right, so the next group is horticultural. When we look at horticulture, we're looking at small-scale agriculture. And when we look at this, the division of labor, let's start with group size. The group size, we're looking at villages, so perhaps 200 to 500 people, maybe fewer. Mobility tends to be generational. And what I mean by that is because fertilizer is not used, land will burn out or need to be given a rest. So in many horticultural societies, people tend to live in one place until all the land around them has been worked and is starting to lose its productivity. When they move a short way away, it's because the land where they were living is no longer good. So then they move a short way away and start again. And then in 20 years ago, where the land around them is losing its productivity, they might move on, maybe back to the place where they were before, where their soils may have recovered and will recover again. And then they'll support crops again. So the Pueblo Indians in the American Southwest, they're horticulturalists. And this kind of generational movement may be in part explanation for the abandonment of Mesa Verde. They don't consider moving on an abandonment the way we would see it. They see it as a natural part of the sequence of life. So looking at those societies helps us to understand this. Their leadership is often based on a consensus of selected leaders, such as a council of elders representing every family in the village. So there are some leaders who are leaders for a longer period of time. They're not temporary leaders depending on the situation. So there'll be consensus though. They'll be voted, and these will be selected leaders. Material culture, definitely more than for foragers. Because since horticulturalists don't move around so much, they can collect more things. They can collect heavier things and fragile things. There still is an overall trend toward considering big differences in wealth as dangerous and wrong, but a definite sense of ownership exists, unlike in foraging society where goods tend to be shared more commonly. The division of labor tends to be gender-based, so like with hunter-gatherers, women are associated more with plants and men with animals. And again, a lot of that has to do with the fact that women really are, they are the way that young children, babies and young toddlers get their food. And so a woman can't be gone as much, and it's a little bit more difficult to travel and to be further away and in more dangerous situations when you have a child. The next group I want to look at are pastoralists, or also called pastoralism. And when we talk about pastoralism, the patterns for this vary according to the types of animals being herded. So when we talk about pastoralists, these are herders, animal herders. And for example, the Bedouins of the Arabian Peninsula have camels as well as horses, goats, and sheep. Camels are amazing pack animals that can carry a lot of weight for great distances and don't need a lot of food. So the Bedouins have a lot of stuff and live in large groups. But the Navajo, shown in the lower picture, historically herded sheep and goats and have only a few horses. And they had a much smaller scale lifestyle, more like that of hunter-gatherers. So it really depends on the types of animal being herded and the kinds of resources they have available to them. Group size with pastoralists tend to be small to medium. So 15, so that's really small, all the way to 1,500. And this will really depend on the society. And it also depends on the kind of mobility. So their mobility can be high as people move to find forage for animals. Many pastoralists interact with agricultural and horticultural people and practice a form of movement designed to complement the horticulturalists. This movement is called transhumance and is not really defined very well. And what it means is that it's usually a seasonal movement based on elevation, using the high pastures that are no good for agriculture in the summer, which gets the animals out of the fields of the agriculturalists who are located at lower elevations. And then in the winter, the pastoralists will return to those lower elevations where animals can eat the stubble from the fields, fertilize them, and the pastoralists trade animal products for plant products with the agricultural people. If you've ever read the stories from the Old Testament, the herders in the Bible are classic pastoralists that practice this kind of movement. Leadership is highly variable. There's no real good pattern here. And sometimes it's based on consensus. Sometimes there's a single leader who has sort of established themselves as a chief or a big man. So it really depends on the situation. Material culture also depends on different variables, especially transport options. The Bedouins carry around a lot of stuff. The Navajo very little. So it depends on the situation. How much are they moving? Do they have animals that can help them carry stuff? Do they have a bigger population that can help carry stuff? And then the division of labor is mostly age-based and gender-based. Often herding is slow, boring work and keeps people away from home. So kids around 10 to 17 years of age are often expected to do this work. So if you have a teenager driving you crazy around the house, maybe consider becoming a pastoralist. And the last thing we're going to look at is agriculture, which is a little different from horticulture. Horticulture is small-scale agriculture. When we talk about agriculture, we're talking about intensive agriculture. So note that we're talking about how a society on the whole gets its food. And so we, as a group in our own culture, we are all agriculturalists, even if you never grow your own food. The very fact that you can get food without ever growing it or foraging for it is proof that you are part of an intensive agricultural society. The group size is extremely large, like ours, because surpluses are possible. So think about that. The group size is based on how much food is available. In intensive agriculture, surpluses are possible. Modern cities with populations in the millions are supported by intensive agriculture. Since one farmer can grow enough food for many people, groups can be very, very large. Mobility is low. People may move around, but our cities are pretty permanent, and even the people that move around do it between established places and relatively infrequently. So they're not moving seasonally, not typically. Leadership is class-based. We are a class-based society, so think about our own society. Power and leadership and authority fall in the hands of a very few people. And how those leaders are established vary from society to society, but leadership tends to be class-based, with upper-class people being in charge. Material culture. Think about our own culture. The more the better. Wealth defines class and status and is to be strived for. Staying in one place allows you to accumulate a lot of stuff. You already know this if you've ever moved after living in a house for 10 years. And then we look at division of labor, craft specialization, and many of you may be going towards a degree in something very specialized. Since not all of us have to farm, many of us have to get our food by doing other jobs that then pay us so we can buy the food we need. That means we get very precise division of labor according to professional categories: doctors, teachers, potters, farmers, construction workers, and so on. And gender and wealth also play a role in the division of labor, and that varies from culture to culture. So this week, I want you to think about that. Think about, when you look around our own culture, the fact that surplus has created the ability for a culture to be like this. But think about it. If we were hunter-gatherers, would we be able to have this way of life? And I will see you online.